Hey guys, welcome back to the channel. Today we've got 5 more mistakes that sign carvers are making. Check it out. You guys know we love what we do. We've got over 2,000 videos. Hit that subscribe button and that bell icon so you get notified because we've got some great projects coming up you guys don't want to miss. Do us a favor, hit that button.
So if you guys haven't seen it, we actually did a video about 5 mistakes that sign carvers make last year. You can check that out right here. But there's a ton of questions we get on a regular basis, so we're going to go over 5 more. Alright, so mistake number 1. One of the things we see a lot is that people try to white knuckle that router like a grandma driving a Cadillac, just gripping that thing like there's no tomorrow. One of the issues I used to have when I first started carving is I didn't even use the handles. I would hold it up around the top of the motor and use my elbows to have control on the bench. So you definitely want to make sure that you're guiding the router. Notice when Dad and I carve, we're only really using 3 fingers on each hand. We're just guiding the router because it wants to go where you want it to go. When you're cutting really deep with, say, the spiral upcut bit or cutting a super deep chamfer, that's a little bit different because you're taking out a ton of wood. You really got to keep a hold of that thing. If you're doing your carving, your profiles, your 60s, your 90s, whatever, then you just are guiding that router and you're just helping it move along. You do not have to grip this thing like it's going to jump out of your hands. Maybe your past experience has showed you that your router will try to run away from you depending on what bits you were using. But one thing to remember is the bits that we use are designed for this specific purpose. So they don't try to run away from you. You're just guiding it where it wants to go.
Okay, mistake number 2 that we see all the time is what I call the buffer zone, especially outset letters. And you're cutting outset letters that are maybe 2 inches or less. If you're not cutting at least 3/16 of an inch deep with your profile bit, you want to make a second cut around that letter. The reason for that is that you want to give yourself enough room so that you don't run into your letter when you're doing your background. You want to make sure that you make a second cut, but not in that same groove. You want to be just slightly outside of that original groove. That way you're taking away any high spots and you're giving yourself extra room for when you come in to do your cleanup with your 60 or your 90. So if you're using the profile bit, whether you're doing inset letters or outset letters, if you're going 3/16 or more deep, you don't need a buffer zone. But if you're going less than that, then your groove is not wide enough to give you that extra room when you come in with your cleanup bit.
All right, mistake number 3. Using the wrong sanding grits for the wrong purposes. A lot of people ask us, why does the primer gunk up the sanding belt so bad or the sanding disc? And usually it turns out to be that you're using maybe 120 or 180 grit to try to get most of that black off of your sign. That's not what you want to do. What you want to do is, depending on the hardness of the board, you want to go with maybe 60 or 80. That's really our go-to. If it's a hard board, then we're going to go 60 grit to get 90% of the black off of our sign after we carve it and spray it and everything. If it's a real soft wood, say like pine or redwood, then we'll go up to 80 grit just because it doesn't need to be quite so aggressive, and especially with that disc sander, man, it takes off a ton of wood. Last thing you want to do is gouge your sign. So once you have 90% of the black off of your sign and you use your rougher grit, depending on what type of board you're using, you want to go back with a random orbital and 120 grit. When you're sanding, you have to go in steps. So making sure you're using the right grit for the right purpose is key.
So mistake number 4. When I first started carving, one of the biggest problems I had wasn't controlling the router, it was the sanding operation. Now back in those days we were using belt sanders, and we used belt sanders for decades. Only just in the last several years have we gone to disc sanders. But whether you're using a belt sander or a disc sander, you've got to be aware that you've got carving in that board, and if you let that thing tip at the wrong time, you're going to be gouging off outset letters or the middle of inset letters. So if you're using a belt sander, just make sure that that thing stays completely level with your board. If you don't, then what's going to happen is that belt sander could tip on you. Now, that being said, as soon as I moved over to the disc sander, now you are tipping it on purpose. but you can go too much. You have to still try and keep it as level as possible, but that disc sander is such a beast that if you just lay it flat like a random orbital, it's gonna go all over the place. You're gonna have no control. So you do have to tip it just slightly, but not too much, because then you can hit some of these islands, outset letters or the middle of inset letters. Another thing to be careful of when you're using the random orbital sander for your fine finish, make sure that those discs are perfectly flat, that they're not bent at all, because if they're bent on the edges, they may catch an outset letter or catch some of your carving, and then you've got something that you need to sand even more, and that's not what you want.
All right, now number 5. Now this kind of correlates with number 1 a little bit. You want flesh on the table and you want flesh on the board. In construction, there's a safety rule. You have to have 3 points of contact on a ladder at all times. This is pretty similar. You want as many points of contact with your bench while you're carving. If you're trying to hold your elbows up, or like I said, how I would put my elbows on the board and just grab the motor of the router, that's just 2 small points of contact. You want your forearms and the side of your hands on the board as you're carving. The more points of contact you're gonna have, the more control you're gonna have. That's how you can just guide the router instead of trying to push it around. It makes a huge difference, and little plug here, the base plates, that's how you get it done.
So there you go, guys. That's 5 more mistakes that we see all the time. We're going to be doing more of these, so if you guys have challenges, things that you want to see us cover, especially in the area of mistakes and stuff, let us know. We're happy to do some more.
Yeah, you can send us an email, either Ryan@makeawoodssign.com or Eric@makeawoodssign.com. And guys, we'd love to feature some of your guys' struggles in our videos. That way we can help you out.
All right, there you go, guys. Thanks again for watching. We'll see you on the next one. We love you. Bye-bye.
Bye.